In this video, I wanted to talk to you about basic switch and end device configuration, which is covered in Module 2 of the CCNA1 course. So the first thing I wanted to show you was the objectives. There's quite a few objectives for Module 2, and I'm showing you this because I want you to use this as your checklist of what you need to learn out of Module 2. I also wanted you to pay attention to the wording for each of the objectives. For example, explain how to access a Cisco iOS device for configuration purposes. That means that is more than likely a question that would be multiple choice question on knowing how to explain it. That's different than the basic device configuration, which states configure a Cisco iOS device using CLI. That means you need to be able to do the hands-on component. So configure the device via the commands. So make sure you pay attention to the wording. Another one of those things would be verifying connectivity. That might be a show command, which we'll learn a little bit more about in this module. But those are the things you'll want to pay attention to with your objectives. And again, use this as a checklist or a study guide. When you get done with Module 2, you should be able to do each of the items under the list of objectives. Now, Cisco's operating system is often referred to as the iOS. Internetwork Operating System is what that actually stands for. So if you're hearing me talk about the iOS, I'm talking about the operating system. Now, look at this picture here. We have the user interface, and we have a shell, a kernel, and the hardware. Now, the shell is how the user interacts with the computer. So whether that's command line mode or a graphical user interface, you have the hardware, which is the physical components, and then you have the kernel, which is coordinating between the hardware and the software. So if you're using command line, you're actually typing in commands. This is an example here. If you're using the graphical user interface, Windows is a good example of a graphical user interface for you to have things to click on. Okay? And the purpose of your operating system is really to allow you to be able to run programs within that system. You can have a graphical user interface. You're going to use a mouse to interact with everything. You can enter text and commands. You can view the output. With a command line, you're actually entering commands rather than using a graphical user or pointing and clicking on different things. Okay, so you can still use a keyboard and you can view the output on a monitor, but it just depends on what you want to do as to what type of operating system that you want. Now, each type of product, so a switch or a router, you would use a particular operating system for that. You can find all those on the Cisco website. So usually when you're using equipment, you'll see that you have a login to the Cisco website. So if you need to update your software, something you should be able to do that. You can look it up based on what type of device it is. Now, depending on how you access that operating system, that will be determined by whether you want to use console, secure shell, or telnet. Now, when you configure via console, that's actually a physical cable that you're going to use, and you're going to be in the same room as the device. So if there's no configuration on a device, then you're going to need to use console method to do that, because that's your only option. There's nothing configured there to allow you to use anything else. You'll actually connect a cable, a console cable, and you will open a program. Usually it's a terminal emulation program. There's hyperterminal, there's PuTTY, there's several different types. And then you will configure the device based on being physically connected to it. It's also called out-of-band access. Now, once you configure and put a basic configuration and configure the device to allow you to use telnet or secure shell, then you can use both of those and use those remotely. Okay? Those are called in-band. methods, whereas the console is considered an out-of-band method. Now, a terminal emulation program is what I was referring to a few minutes ago. So hyperterminal, there's TeraTerm. We often use PuTTY, and this is what it would look like. And I believe this is what you have on your NetLab. So with that, this is what you use to choose the settings to log into your particular device. And you will have some labs where you'll be able to learn how to do that. So section 2 is iOS navigation. So how to navigate on your operating system. So what I've done is created this small packet tracer, and I thought I would just show you how to do that. There's lots of videos within this chapter, but I thought I'd just take a couple of minutes and kind of go over some of this configuration. Now, there are various modes within a Cisco device, so whether it's a Cisco switch or a router, it's going to be the same. Now, I'm going to draw your attention to some of this information here. I'm just going to scroll up. So as your device boots up, it gives you a lot of information. You can see here, it says WS296024TT. This is a 2960 series switch, 24 Ethernet ports. You can see here it says 24 fast Ethernet ports, 2 gigabit ports, how much memory, how much flash you have. Let's see, there's the Ethernet address, you can see the model numbers. So you can see lots of information here. You can see the software version. I'm going to stretch this out so you can see that. The last release, there's a release update on that. And then it gets you to the prompt. Okay, so this prompt is what we call the user mode. The user mode you see has the greater than symbol here, the switch and the greater than symbol. At this level, you can't really do a whole lot here. It's more for just kind of looking around. It's the lowest level. Now, when you type EN or enable, okay, either one, you can abbreviate by typing EN. So I typed enable and hit enter. This takes me to the privilege mode prompt. This privileged or privilege exec mode prompt you see has the pound sign there. And at this mode is where we can start actually configuring devices. So for example, if I wanted to configure, you can type configure terminal or config T for short, and it takes you to the next prompt. So your privilege mode changes now to the global configuration mode, and you can see that because you have the config here. If you wanted to move back and forth between the prompts, you can type exit, and that will take you back one step. So I'm going to hit enter. So it takes me back to the privilege mode prompt. If I type exit again, it will take me all the way out of the device and back to the user mode. And again, type EN or enable, it takes me back to privilege mode. Config T will take me from privilege mode into your global mode. And this is the mode where you can actually start configuring devices. So if I wanted to give my device a name, I could enter a command to do that. That command would be host name and then whatever name I wanted. I could call it switch 1. When I hit enter, notice my command prompt immediately changed from switch to switch 1. So if you see a question on an exam and ask, when did the changes take effect? They take effect immediately on a Cisco device. So these are some of your prompts. Some of your other prompts that you can see are, let's see, I'm going to go into an interface. So interface FA01. Now, notice when I went into Fast Ethernet 01, do you notice my prompt changed to config-if for interface? So I'm going to type exit to go back one step. I could type end and go all the way back to privilege mode. If I decided I wanted to configure again, I would need to type config T again. This is short for configure terminal. Now, what if I wanted to go into the console line console 0. Notice it changed to config -line. Okay, again, and I want to exit out of this prompt, and I want to exit again. And it takes me back. So you can go back and forth. So this is a little bit about how to get back and forth between your various prompts. So I'm going to flip back. So within the section is some of the information I was referring to about your user and privilege modes, your various configuration modes. So I would encourage you to watch these videos and use a syntax checker and kind of practice that. The next thing I want to show you is your command structure. This is the basic command structure when you're using your command line mode. So the first thing that you'll see is the prompt. So whether it's a switch or a router, you'll see that first. And then you'll see the command itself, so ping, and you'll see a space, and then whatever you want to ping. So your keyword or your argument here. You could do a show command also. Show commands are very common with Cisco because they tell you information about the device or the protocols. So if you wanted to look to see what protocols have been added to a device, you can tell it to show you the protocols. Show IP protocols. IP being the protocol that's user IP version 4. You can configure a device and it may or may not tell you errors. It won't tell you that you did something wrong necessarily. In some cases it will, and we'll kind of look at that. You can also use help in order to tell what you can configure at a particular device. So let's kind of look at that and then look at the syntax here. So they're looking at the syntax on configuring a description. Notice you follow several different key arguments here. So you have some things that are boldface or some that are italics. If you see like square brackets, that's where you insert something. So here, switch port security aging, and then you pick one of these, for example. But we'll have several exercises for you to practice. Now, the help features that you have, there's different ways you can use help. I'm going to switch back over to my packet tracer, and I want to show you the different ways you can use the help feature. So I'm going to type exit and go back out of my device, back to your user mode. Now, if I use a question mark, that question mark says, here's all the list of commands that you can issue at the user mode prompt. So this is it. So there's a few here, but not a whole lot. You can see we can like ping, and you can exit, you can log out, but you really can't do a whole lot. You can use some show commands and look at some things. Now, if I type enable and go to the privilege mode prompt, I'm going to issue the same command, the question mark. Now, look at all the commands I have, and see it says more, so it's not done. When you see the more prompt, you can either hit enter and go line by line to see each thing that's there, or you can hit the space bar and it will go an entire page at the time. So these are all the commands. So you can use the question mark right there at the prompt, or if you know you want a telnet, so we have telnet as an option here, telnet space question mark to find out what do I do next. So now it's telling me to enter an IP address. So I could type the address there. I'm not going to do that because we don't have anything configured, so it really wouldn't work. But again, you can use your question mark right there at the prompt. You can use it after a word. You can even use it in a word. So if I know that I want to issue a command that starts with TEL, for example, but I can't remember the rest of it, I use the question mark within the word, and it will give me all the options that start with those 3 letters before I enter the question mark. So that's one way to use your help. Now, on your Cisco exams, if you're talking about the certification exam, you can use the question mark. They have not disabled that. So you may not know off the top of your head how to issue a certain command, but you can use your question mark all the way through the command if you want. And if you get used to using your question marks, that will help you significantly on your exams, because that will help you kind of figure out what a particular command is if you can't remember off the top of your head, if you get nervous or just can't remember for whatever reason. Something else that's also useful are hotkeys and shortcuts. So when you're typing command line, there's more of an opportunity to make errors because you're typing everything out. So one of the things that's useful is a tab key. So I use the tab key a lot, and you've seen me use the backspace that erases a character to the cursor, but then you have some other ones here that you can use as well. So I'll show you what the tab key looks like. So if I were to go into line console 0, for example, I forgot to type config T. So line con 0, and then I'm going to type logging synchronous. It's a really long word, so what I can do is just hit the tab key and it'll finish it for me. So that's how you can use the tab key. One good example of that. And again, you can use your backspace key. You can also use your up arrow. So I'm using my up arrow here, and it should hold up to the last 10 commands in your command buffer. And you can move up and down by using your up and down arrows. So there's lots of useful keyboard shortcuts. Again, here's the enter key, which displays the next line at the time, like I did earlier when you had a whole page full of information. Or you can use a space bar, which just shows you the entire page at the time. Now you use those when you see the more button. These other Control-C and Control-Z replace using like the end and the exit words that I used earlier. And Control-Shift-6, if you issue a ping or a trace route and is having trouble and it's taking a really long time and you don't want to wait for it, you can do Control-Shift-6 and that will end the process. So that's another useful tool. Now you have a couple of exercises, and these will walk you through some of the things that I was just referring to. Now we start getting to your basic device configuration. There are several rules that you need to know when you're configuring. For example, with your device names, it has to start with a letter, it cannot contain spaces, it must end with a letter or digit, only letter, digits, and dashes, and be less than 64 characters. So here, what they've done is named the switches. So switch floor 1, 2, and 3, and they're kind of descriptive so you know where they're located. To configure that, you just configure terminal host name like I did earlier when I chose switch 1. For your passwords, keep in mind the same information as configuring a typical password. Use passwords that are longer than 8 characters, a combination of upper, lower, special characters. Avoid using the same password for all your devices, and don't use things that can be guessed easily. Now, with that being said, you will see that we use Cisco or class most of the time in this class. Now, they're pretty weak passwords, but for learning purposes, it's easier to use the same password, especially if we're using classroom equipment or in some other type of device. In case somebody accidentally leaves a password on there, then we know what it is. Or if I'm checking a packet tracer for you, I know what password it is instead of having to know what the entire class individually configured. When you're configuring passwords, there's various types. So this first password that we're looking at, they've gone into config T, line console 0. So the line console password, this password would be used if somebody were to go in to physically connect to the console port on a device and start configuring. This would be the first password they would see. So you're configuring it so that person would have to type the password of Cisco, and the login says that you want a login prompt to be provided. Then, once the person types in that password, they would go in and type enable, like I did earlier. Now, if you don't put a password there, you saw I was able to go directly to the privilege mode prompt, then someone could have access to go a little bit deeper into your router or your switch. So if you go to config T and type enable secret class, that sets a password when you go from the user mode prompt to the privilege mode prompt. The VTY password, this is setting up your telnet. So line VTY 0 space 15, this is for ports 0 through 15. So 16 total is the number of times you're allowing telnet. The password is set to Cisco, and of course you want a login prompt. Those passwords are not encrypted. This is the way you would actually encrypt those. Let me show you what the difference would be if we were to do that. So I'm going to go exit just so we can start fresh. So line con 0, and we're doing password Cisco login line VTY 0 space 15 password class and login. Now you'll notice I just went straight through and I didn't exit out and then go back in. Your curriculum does teach you to do that, but technically it will work if you just continue to type. Now I'm going to type show run because this is going to be showing me my running configuration. The running configuration is what you're currently using, and that is in RAM. So I'm going to hit the space bar so we can go a page at a time because I want you to see the passwords. So do you see my passwords? I can read those. So if somebody were walking behind me, they could see what my passwords are. That's not very secure. But if I go in and use this command, service password encryption, now when I type show run and scroll down, now you see they're encrypted. So that's the difference between plain text and encrypted passwords. So that's what this command is used for. And they typed the entire command, show running config. So you can either type show running config or show run like I did earlier. This command, configure terminal and then banner, it stands for message of the day. This is what you would see when you first log into a device. So I'll show you. I'm going to go back here and I'm going to type exit. Now, right here, I don't see anything, but it says user access verification. So I typed Cisco, which is the password we set up for our console password. Now notice that you did not see it as I typed. That is okay. So I often get emails saying I'm typing in my password and the device is not taking it. It's taking it, but it's not showing you for security reasons. Otherwise, it would not be very secure. So I'm going to type enable here. We've not set up enable password, but if we did, that's where you would see it. I'm going to go to config T, and I'm going to show you what a banner looks like. Banner, message of the day, and I'm going to use a pound sign. Type no unauthorized users, and another pound sign. Now, if I were to exit back out and exit again, I'm going to hit enter. Now we see the banner. So it's right there where we would normally access it. Again, I'm going to go back in, typing my console password, and go back in to privilege mode. So you have a couple of labs practicing that. I do want to show you something else. Let's see. So I want to show you, we don't have an enable password here. There are two different types of passwords. I'm going to type config T. So you could type enable password, my password, I don't know. You could type that. That could be your password. Or you could do enable secret. My encrypted password. I'll just, my encrypted pass. Okay. So the difference between these is that the enable password is not encrypted, the enable secret is encrypted. Okay, so that's the difference between the two. So now, so that's your console password. And then the enable password. So that enable password or enable secret that I just entered. And then you're at your privilege mode prompt. You can see your banner there. I can type show run, and you can see the enable secret and the enable password. The only reason you can see the enable password is being encrypted is because I entered the service password encryption command. Okay, there's your banner. You can see that. Now, one thing I will say about your banner, so you saw that I entered that earlier. So when I entered the banner, notice banner space MOTD space, and I did a pound sign. So the pound sign there, this is just a character I chose. So you could have used a % sign, you could have used quotation marks, you could use whatever you want. But notice it's at the beginning and the end. Now the reason that the banner has that at the beginning and the end is that these are the markers that tell the device to print everything in between. So notice you didn't see the pound signs when they showed up when we logged in right here. You only saw what was printed in between. So it doesn't matter really what your characters are that you have at the beginning and the end. You just need to make sure they're not within your message. So if I said no unauthorized users on switch number 3, it would cut off at the number sign. Okay. Because that was the character that I chose. So the next part of this shows you how to save your files. So you can save your files. Well, this is showing you how to use PuTTY and save those. But to save the file within Packet Tracer, you're going to type this command. Copy, run, start. Now, this command is an abbreviation for copy, running config, space, startup config. So why do we enter that command? Well, the running configuration is in RAM, and that's what you're currently using. The startup configuration is where your file is saved. So this, in essence, would be the equivalency of clicking the File Save command in Microsoft Word. If you want to permanently save something, you would need to do that. Otherwise, you can type and use whatever's on your screen, but if you turn your computer off, you're going to lose all that. Okay, so copy running config to startup config or copy run start will actually save your configuration. So the other thing that I wanted to look at was how you would enter your addresses on devices, because that is something else in your curriculum in our ports and addresses. So here we're looking at how you would configure the properties on your device. So here, usually you're going to go down to, the little computer icon and right click and view your TCP/IP properties. If you're wanting to put in a particular address, you would type it in here. If you want the address to be obtained automatically through DHCP, so here we're looking at IPv6, but if you're using DHCP, I'm going to go down and you would actually click where it says here, obtain an IP address automatically. That is right here. But when you click on your Ethernet properties, so you go down and right click in the corner of your computer and choose the network properties, this is the first screen you usually see, and you would choose TCP/IP version 4 and go to properties, and then you would be able to type in the address and make sure you click OK. So that's how you would set it on a end device, such as a PC. So after that, you have a lot of videos and you have some syntax checkers and packet tracers that you can use to practice everything in this chapter. There's several other labs. So I would say make sure you know how to do that. The only other thing that I'm seeing right here is how to configure an address on the switch. So here is your command, config T, like we did earlier, and then you go into your interface VLAN 1. Now, why do we enter interface VLAN 1? That is not a physical interface, that's a virtual interface. By default, all Cisco switches have a virtual interface. Now, you don't access that interface to do routing per se, or you really just configure this address so that you can actually reach that device remotely if you need to. It has to have some type of address for you to be able to find it. Okay. So you would go into interface VLAN 1, type the address and the subnet mask associated with it. For every single IP address you have to type a subnet mask. No shutdown. No shutdown says do not shut down. So that's the opposite of shutdown. If you wanted to shut down the interface so it didn't work, you would type shutdown. If you don't want it shut down, you type no shutdown. And typically we enter no shutdown when we configure a Cisco device, because by default it might try to go back in and shut itself down after being configured. So you type no shutdown to bring it up. And then here they've entered the IP default gateway command. So the default gateway command is used to point off traffic to the local router. The router is what moves your data around from one network to the next. So the switches are used within a network, whereas routers are used to route information outside your network. So if you want to make sure all your traffic gets to your router to be routed outside of your network, you're going to configure the IP default gateway command here. So you get to practice that, and as well as in your packet tracers. So you have the syntax checker, your packet tracers, and you have several others located in the section 9. And then of course when you get to the end here, you have a nice summary of what you've configured or what you've learned, including all the configuration information, and a quiz for you to practice. So again, go back through and make sure that you can complete all of the objectives that are at the beginning of the module. So this is back at the beginning part. So you should be able to do all these after we looked at it, explain how to access a Cisco iOS device. So we talked about that, how to navigate through the command structure, configuring a device using the command line interface, how to save the running configuration. We did that with the copy run start. Explain how devices communicate across your different media. So they're using the ports and the addresses on the device. Make sure you read that part. I didn't spend as much time on that, but make sure you read through. Configure a host device with an IP address. Verifying connectivity between the two devices. So again, make sure you can do all of the things that are listed here in the objectives, and you should be very well prepared for your module exam.